Hi guys, this PowerPoint is all about how to design instruction for learners with intellectual disability. So just as a review, learners with intellectual disability have four main characteristics. One, they have a poor memory, so it's often important that we repeat things over and over, but finding out how to do it in different ways. They have a slow learning rate, so going slowly and chunking things in little pieces. There's two pieces to attention. One, they often have poor attention, such as, we learned about students with ADHD, but they also have poor attention to detail. So, for example, if they're reading a story and you want them to find the main idea, find a specific detail, they may have trouble attending to that. So they often need more specific guidance on finding that kind of information. And then finally, they also have poor generalization, which means that students with intellectual disabilities can learn a skill or learn knowledge in one setting or with one set of kind of materials, and then when we ask them to do it in a different setting or with different people, different materials, they may struggle with that. So for example, when I was a teacher, I worked with kids in the classroom on learning how to pay for things. So we did a lot of role playing. So, we'd set up a store, say, welcome to Target, and pretend to work at Target and say, have them ring up things, tell them the total, they'd pay for it, perfect. We'd go to actual Target, and it was like they had never done it before. So there was something about transferring those skills from one setting to another that they really struggled with, and that's called generalization. I do want to clarify accommodations versus modification, because up until now we've really looked at accommodations, which are access to a learning goal, access to learning but still retaining a learning goal. Whereas modifications, your students are still learning, but you may change it so significantly that the learning goal actually ends up changing. So for example, students will write a persuasive multi-paragraph essay with an introduction, supporting details, and conclusion summary. So those are the things that we're looking for. For accommodations, you may offer a student the use of a computer using a scribe. They can use a dictionary. They could even write 3 paragraphs instead of 5 because that's still multiple paragraphs. They could use a pre-writing graphic organizer, an editing checklist, or possibly a partner to edit. So there's lots of things that you could do that still retains that same learning goal. Whereas if we're doing some modifications, it may look like they could draw it instead of write. So can you see how if you give a student the option to draw, that's going to alter the learning goal? So that's where we move into the modification territory. Same thing about writing a few sentences instead of paragraphs. They give a persuasive speech instead of writing, and they may just support a partner while that partner is doing the activity. So those significantly change the learning goal, and we consider those modifications. The reason why I'm clarifying that now is when we work with students who have intellectual disability or multiple disabilities, or their IQ is so low that accommodations aren't going to be what they need to access learning. They need something that may significantly change the learning goal. So this is the category of students that we really think about, and that's what we're going to talk about in this PowerPoint. So some instructional recommendations are prioritize, providing modifications, obviously, making it concrete and relevant, using lots of repetition, breaking tasks down, give immediate feedback, and addressing social issues. We're going to spend most of the time in this PowerPoint talking about modifications because we're really thinking about instruction at this point. But I do just want to talk about repetition, for example. So when I taught students with intellectual disability, we often, they would be working on sight words. So being able to read something phonetically means you're reading you're reading the letters, you're translating the sounds, and you're kind of putting it all together and reading. Students with intellectual disability may not be able to do that. So we teach them to be able to sight read, which means they see a word, they can immediately tell you what it means because they memorize what it looks like. That's a sight word. So as you can imagine, that's pretty difficult to do, and you have to end up practicing that a lot. So as a teacher, I would have to really be creative and find different ways to provide practice with that. So we would do flashcards, obviously. We would play sight word bingo. We would play this activity where we had a big shower curtain with words, and we'd throw a bean bag. We do sight word memory. We would do sight word, find your partner with the same word. Any way that you could teach sight words, I've done it. So that's what I mean about repetition. So often you have to repeat, repeat, repeat. which is why often that students with intellectual disabilities are not included in general ed, because they need such significant modifications to the work that a general ed classroom would be difficult to provide those opportunities. When we talk about prioritizing, one question really is the key to this, which is what will students need after they graduate high school? So students with intellectual disability, used to only be taught like how to make a bed and how to brush your teeth and how to cook and how to clean. And then we started realizing that students with intellectual disability, even with low IQ, can learn academics. So the question is not can they learn academics, but it's should they. So what we're trying to do as a field is grapple with that question. So one of the ways that really can help individualize and personalize is, will the student need this after they graduate? So for some students with intellectual disability, they may actually live at home and they may not be going to go live independently or live in a supported living arrangement. So as you can imagine, the things that they might learn is a little bit different than what other students who are going to live independently learn. So this is where we really think about that individualizing piece to special education. All right, so let's talk about modifications to instruction. We've got size, level of support, input, output, difficulty, output, and participation. So let's talk about what each of those mean. So when we think about the size, we're reducing the number of items required. So for example, if you're giving a worksheet of 20 math problems, you have them do 10 math problems, 5 math problems. So you're basically just cutting down the amount of work that they need to do. Same with if you're going to assign 10 spelling words this week, maybe you assign 5 or 2 or even 1. When we think about the level of support that we provide, often that might look like peer tutoring. So they may be working with another, I'm just going to move this so you guys can see what I've written. So they may be working with another student. You may be pre-teaching small groups, individual work. Remember that some of these also can be accommodations, right? Pre-teaching can definitely be an accommodation. It's not necessarily a modification, but these are some things that work for students with intellectual disability. Input output basically means how are we teaching students, so how are we inputting the information, and output is how are they showing us what they know. So for input, it could be field trips, guest speakers, manipulatives. So think about things that really bring things to life. How do we bring our instruction to life? So when I teach this class during the typical semester, I use lots and lots of videos of people with disabilities. Because even though you guys read about and you listen to me talk and you go on iResponsibles, really seeing those videos can be very helpful because it brings things to life. Output. So think about, again, remember that example about the writing the multiple paragraphs. So can they draw, use pictures instead of words, etc. Lots of different ways to modify. Think about difficulty. So can they draw instead of writing, which we just talked about, but also adapted materials, which I'm going to show you some examples of adapted reading materials. But basically what that means is that we take what the general ed class is doing and we find a way to make it accessible. So if they're doing like a math problem or they're doing math work, we may have 1 page per math problem and we have each step written out. So if it's multiple math, let's say it's multiple digit adding, right? So for a student without an intellectual disability, they may get 20 problems of multiple digit addition problems. For a student with an intellectual disability, they may get that first page with that problem, but instead of just writing like 12 plus 48, we may write 12 plus 48, and then we have that first step, which would be, all right, let me think in my head, 2 plus 8, then they write the answer. And then maybe we have them like fill in the 0, and then the second part is carry the 1. And then the third step is, right, so we're breaking it down and we're changing the difficulty of the problem. We're just really adapting the materials for students. And then finally, participation, which really is about identifying alternative learner outcomes. So let's say you have students who are working in a small group and they're, writing a report and creating a presentation. So when you do that, when you assign that project to a group of students, you pretty much expect equal participation among the group members. For a student with intellectual disability, however, what you can do is identify a small, manageable, achievable role for them to fulfill, and they may not participate in it to the full extent, like creating the presentation and writing the report, but maybe they're the ones that read part of the report, or maybe they're the ones that gather the materials, or maybe they're the, so you're sort of like identifying an alternative outcome to that. Here's some examples of adaptive materials. This is an example. It's called News to You, and it comes on, it's an online newsletter subscription, and I use this in my classroom, and when I use it, they have 3 different levels of adaptation. So this is the second level. The first level would be this American Thanksgiving, and everything written out with text and no pictures. So can you see when this is adapted, there's pictures for each word. And then finally, the third level would be something very, very simple, just a few sentences, or a few words. So you could say Thanksgiving, thanks for good things, pilgrims, Native Americans, U.S. holiday, families, big meal. So that would be adapting it. You're changing the difficulty of that. Here's an example of an adapted Alice in Wonderland book. Often the books that you guys will teach kids and work with kids in classrooms, there's adapted materials out there. So if you just Google and look around, there's a bunch of libraries. UNC Charlotte, where I did my doctoral work, they have a big project where they adapted a whole bunch of books, and you can just get them online. So these are just some examples. So when you read the book, it's obviously a lot more text, but here's the adapted way to do it. So you shouldn't kill yourself trying to adapt materials, because often the internet already has it for you. Thinking about concrete and relevance, remember we talked about bringing things to life, so using hands-on materials, using manipulatives, pictures, field trips, guest speakers, videos. So when I taught kids to purchase things in Target, let's say I had a Target uniform, right? That may have helped a little bit. Let's say instead of fake money, I used real money. Let's say we actually were able to practice in a Target, like on a closed register. All of those things are going to help with generalization, right? Because that makes it concrete and it makes it relevant. So really think about that. All right. So what I want to do is show you an example of what I might do with some of these modifications. So here's a class assignment that students are learning about the 50 states. They have to memorize the capitals. They're assigned a specific state to write a report. They're given a packet of information. They have to research on the internet to write a report, and they have like certain things that they need to include in the report, such as like population or brief history. Here are ways to accommodate and modify. One thing is, students may memorize only 10 state capitals instead of all 50, or maybe only 2 states, maybe only Maine. Focus on the New England states. Remember we talked about making things relevant. It's very likely that students have traveled to Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts. So they're going to have more of a context for those states. So when they go to memorize the capitals or when they go to write a report, they sort of have this context. Remember we talked about activating background knowledge and having that context, and it really makes new information stick. That's sort of what relevance will do for you. Think about reducing the packet of information or highlighting the important information. Remember we talked about attention to detail and sort of picking out what's important and what do they need to know. Help students do that by highlighting that really important information and sort of getting rid of the extraneous, maybe not so important. Develop a question sheet. So what is the population of Maine? Who was the first governor of Maine? What are the major cities in Maine? So instead of just doing a brief history, you're actually giving them questions they need to answer. Reduce the information the students are required to find. So instead of finding all of those things, maybe you just ask them to find 3 facts about Maine. Maybe they have to find the population, the current governor, and the capital. Provide specific links for research. So instead of just saying, here's the internet, go to town, you're actually giving them, like here's the government or the state webpage for Maine. Here's pictures of Maine, things like that. So you're sort of giving them the pre-selected links. And then instead of report, students can draw a picture, they can deliver an oral report, they can work with a partner or group. So you can see how a lot of these changes are great for kids with intellectual disability because they're still getting access to that academic piece, to that learning, but you're doing it in a way that is so significant, you're changing it, so we're calling it a modification. And that's it. If you guys have any questions, let me know. Thanks.